I'll make sure I'm getting recorded. So I hope that if this recording works, I'll be able to put this up on YouTube. So in case you like it so much that you want to review it, you'll be able to go and watch this on YouTube. Or, we can refer our friends. I have some friends in New York that wanted to see this. So, and if it comes out great, I'll upload it. If it doesn't, then no one needs to know except for whoever's in this room. So I had this idea for this lecture series has been percolating in my mind for years, actually. And as I read things and learn things about the topic that I'm interested in for obvious reasons, Jewish physicians throughout the centuries, you find all kinds of interesting tidbits. And so a lot of them I always wanted to share. Some things are well known, some things are not so well known. I'm going to try to focus more on the things that are not so well known. So one of the titles I wanted to give to the lecture series was Beyond Maimonides, Jewish Doctors Throughout the Centuries. Because everybody knows about the Rambam, who is, of course, probably the most important, most prominent Jewish physician in history. But we will, of course, touch on the Rambam. But what this is going to focus on is going to be either 5 or 6 lectures. And each one is going to take a different period in history and focus on it and what the specific role that Jewish physicians had in that period in history that made that period in history unique and special. So today, the first one, I wanted to focus on the time of Chazal in the Talmud. So, of course, there's a lot of things we can focus on, but because I'm picking out different periods, I'm going to pick this period of time. The period of Chazal, I imagine the easiest way to understand it would be from the period of the Mishnah through the period of the Gemara, somewhere from the middle to beginning of the Bayit Sheni period all the way till the end, to the Chasimat Talmud, which is somewhere around 300 or so in the Common Era. So that's the period of history we're talking about. In that time of history, the world was obviously going through a lot of upheaval and a lot of turmoil. And of course, the Jewish people were caught up in the middle of all of the upheaval and turmoil. And that had a significant effect on the development of our religion, of course, in so many different ways. But I wanted to focus on medicine and disease. So let's look at the major influences in the world on Chazal's understanding of medicine and disease. What if they were listening to the things going on around them? Thank you very much. What would they have learned and incorporated and absorbed from the cultures around them? And then what did Chazal contribute that I believe is very special and unique about Chazal? So before I even get into that, I'm going to divide the way people understand disease, period, into 3 separate categories. The first category is the one with we in this century, what we think of most when we think of disease. We think about it in terms of science, in terms of medicine, in terms of our understanding of anatomy and physiology and genetics and microbiology and so on and so forth. We look at what we believe to be our scientific understanding of the world and the way people and human beings and the way the body functions. And disease is a function of something going wrong, either something going wrong within the body, something going wrong, some kind of microorganism. And the way to fix that, medicine, is to find the problem and fix it. So in other words, it's a very physical, very natural way of understanding disease. But we all know that when somebody gets sick today, we shouldn't know, but it happens to all of us, we treat that part of the way we understand disease by going to the doctor or whoever a healthcare practitioner is going to treat that. The second area is spiritual. We all also understand, or at least we believe, that there's a spiritual component to disease. Exactly how to understand it, how to define it, it really depends. There's a lot of different ways to define it. And throughout the centuries, somebody who believed in God, a monotheist, a Jew, would say, it's God punishing me for this, or I'm suffering because of that, or I don't understand why. But the bottom line is it's coming from some spiritual source, and therefore we pray. We do tshuva, we give tzedakah, we do good deeds. We do something to in effect, affect God's judgment upon us and change it. A person who is, lahavdil, a believer in some idol or whatever religion it might have been, would look to their religion to explain why that particular God or whatever is causing this disease to happen, and they would placate it by sacrificing or worshiping or whatever it is that they did in that particular religion. But that's the spiritual understanding. The third category is really magical. When I say magical, I mean that understanding disease in terms of demons and evil forces understanding disease as coming from these, or astrology even, something that we don't quite understand or don't get, but there's a long, big, broad category of this. And if you look at all of the societies throughout the world, each one had their own version of what these spirits or demons or whatever you want to name them would cause disease. And if you want to combat that, the way to combat that would be with some, depending on which area you're in and depending on the belief system of that area, using some amulet or some herb or some ceremony or some incantation or something like that. So these are really three totally different things. The first one being what we consider the most logical and reasonable, which is medical. The second one, which we still understand today, is spiritual, and the third being what I'm going to call magical. Nowadays, we see all of this, and when someone gets sick, everyone goes to the doctor, takes the medicine, gets the surgery, whatever it is, it's prescribed. They're going to say to heal him. And then you might find people doing all kinds of magical things as well, wearing some kind of amulet or whatever. That's kind of controversial. It's not the topic of today. But we still see echoes of these three approaches. Now that we understand that, let's look at there's really three major cultures to which Chazal were exposed and they lived and functioned under. The first major culture is the Persian culture. We have to understand the Persian culture, and I'm going to get into that in just a minute, but specifically focusing on the Persian understanding of disease and medicine. The second one is the Babylonian culture, or the Chaldean, and we're going to get into that too. That will be the second one. And the third one is the Greek/Roman, which we see as more of the predecessor of what we now know as Western medicine. And all those three, Chazal were living in the lands which were exposed to all three at varying times to varying different amounts. Now, obviously, this can't be a full history lecture on that entire period of history, which lasted 1,000 years or more, but we will focus as much as we can on these cultures and their contribution and understanding of medicine. So first, let's look at the Persian. And we have to understand that one of the Persian medicine and science in general is something that's grossly undervalued. People don't think about it, don't know about it for several reasons. The main one being that the Zoroastrian religion, which was the dominant religion of Persia, has been so overwhelmed and superseded and so gone from the face of the earth by Islam and so on, that people just forget that for what was the most powerful empire in the world for a large period of time and the most dominant force in most of the period of when Shas was written was the Persian Empire, under which believed in the Zoroastrian religion. So we have to focus on them to really understand where Chazal came from with a lot of their understandings of disease. So I'm not going to go into the specifics of the Zoroastrian religion. That's not the purpose of tonight. But one of the main holy book, the Vendidad, and if I pronounce this stuff wrong, please forgive me, and the Avesta, which is like the holy books and holy writings of the Zoroastrian religion, there's a lot of medical literature in there. And they emphasized a lot of these things. But I'm just going to pick out a few that are important. One of the things that the Zoroastrians did was they divided medicine into three types of medicine. One was they called medicine by knife, the second was they called medicine by herbs, and the third was what they called medicine by divine words. And this is in the main holy book of the Zoroastrian religion. This is strikingly similar to what we know today as surgical illnesses, medical illnesses, and prayer, which is just part of what most of us understand the treatment of disease to be. In fact, the first teaching hospital in known history was in, and please forgive if there's anyone here that speaks Persian will probably be appalled at my pronunciation, in Gondishapur. Shapur was the name of some of the kings, the main kings of the Sassanid dynasty in Persia. The Academy of Gondishapur, which was founded mostly in the year 200 of the Common Era, which is directly when Shas was being written in that same area. Right? The times that we know, the times of the Amoraim, of Rav and Shmuel and Abaya and Rava, these were the times when this was taking place. There's a university being established where people came all around the world to learn Persian medicine. And they had a lot of beliefs that made its way into the Greek understanding of the four essential elements of earth, fire, water, and air. They understood disease to be a result of a corruption of any one of the four elements. So anything that corrupted the pure elements they saw as origin of disease, which is how they explain disease that arose from dirty water. If you make dirty water, this was one of their discoveries, if people drink dirty water, you can get ill. So they were very careful to keep the waters of the rivers there clean. So, in fact, they had medical students that studied under professional doctors, and a lot of people look at that as the real foundation of what we know now as the current hospital system of teaching medicine. Now, the sorry, I gotta. A couple of other interesting points before I get to Chazal and the influence that Persian medicine had on Chazal was there's a tremendous amount of literature of the herbs that were used. I don't know, countless numbers of herbs that they used to treat various illnesses. Many of these are found directly in Shas. It's not something that I can sit here and list now, but this has been, people have gone through this. That was really a direct influence of Persian medicine and their use of herbs to treat disease that's found in Shas. We also find the fact that the term of the Aramaic term for a doctor and for healing is asa, is aleph samach aleph, is the Aramaic term. That word directly comes from the Persian, and that the Persian word for a doctor was an asu, and there was two types of doctors. There was the ashipu and the asu. The ashipu was the one who knew all of the spiritual incantations and stuff, and the asu was the doctor. And we see a direct reflection of that in the Gemara, which they took that from the Persians that surrounded them. We also, and there are people out there that are studying this today, the issue of nida. The Zoroastrians had a lot of the halachos of nida that we are familiar with today. They kept very, very similar rules. And the entire understanding of menstruation, a lot of what is found in the Gemara, it directly reflects the understanding that the Persians and the people that in that area where they lived had. In addition, we're all familiar, the Gemara often talks about a ratia, which is a type of bandage they would put on a wound that they use a certain type of plaster, which was directly something that comes from Persian medicine. We see there's a lot of references to that throughout Chazal. So there's numerous places in Chazal where we see the influence that Persian medicine had. One interesting one, which I'm not going to get into now, maybe it's subject for a different lecture series, but that is where they had a rule in this medical school that in order to get certified as a doctor, you had to practice on 3 non-Zoroastrian patients and heal them first. Then you could be approved to treat Zoroastrians. So when we see in context some of the statements of Chazal about treating non-Jewish patients, in the context where they were living in the area where the doctors being trained that were in the culture around them were so discriminatory towards non-Zoroastrians, you can kind of understand a little bit of the tit for tat, where Chazal had not such a great attitude towards non-Jews in their case. But that's a subject for a completely different discussion. But again, we see evidence of Persian influence on Chazal, and I kind of laid out for you some of the main points. Obviously, that itself could be a lecture series, but I think we touched on it enough. The second area is Babylonian medicine. Now, Babylonian medicine is occurring, remember, all at the same time of history. It's a very, very, very different form of medicine, very what would be considered conservative in those times, and it's almost all completely magic and astrology. The term Chaldean, which is the Babylonian people, was in Greece, that was like synonymous with an astrologer. The Babylonians actually contributed a tremendous amount to astronomy and the knowledge of astronomy in those days. In those days, astronomy and astrology, they didn't differentiate between the two. They assumed that the constellations had powers over this world, so the two sciences were not separate. But they believed that all disease comes from demons and various spirits and all kinds of magical things. And the way to ward it off, they would study the different external signs, and they'd say, what hit you here, or what made you sick there, and they would put some either herb or amulet or something like that in order to do it. Some of the herbs had medicinal value and some didn't, but that was their basic approach to medicine. All of the idea, another thing, the idea of ayin hara, the idea of the evil eye, many, many people trace to Babylonian times because the Babylonians strongly believed in the evil eye, and that was we see Rav, who made a statement, and I'm going to quote it later on in the Gemara, that 99% of illnesses are caused by the ayin hara. Rav and Shmuel all functioned in areas where there was heavy Babylonian influence, also Persian influence, because they were kind of juxtaposed between the two. So many people traced the whole idea of ayin hara to there. Exactly what the role of things like ayin hara, or how true they are, how much they mean demons, shadim, all the way from the Rambam's more rationalist view that they don't really exist, all the way to those that believe that they do exist and have power. That's not the place for today's lecture, and I really won't go into that. But just be that as it may, at least state that the influence of those things is certainly felt throughout Shas. We are all aware of what the Gemara in Shabbos says, that Ein Mazel Yisrael, the constellations have no influence. We're all familiar when Avram Avinu, the Medrash tells us, it's a Gemara in Nedarim that tells Avram Avinu looked at the stars and says, the stars say I'm only going to have one son. And God told Avram, no, the stars have no power over you. I'm telling you, you're going to have another son. So you see references where the Gemara is trying to steer us away from these types of beliefs, but you certainly see many places in the Gemara where it refers to astrology and the power of the constellations and so on. So that's kind of a controversial and interesting topic in of itself. But the influence of Babylonian medicine is felt very strongly. So we reviewed Persian medicine and Babylonian medicine. Now let's go to what we consider the beginnings of Western medicine, which is the Greeks. So there were a lot of important Greek physicians, but we can't go through the history of Greek medicine in detail today. But some of the key guys we have to touch on. Let's just touch on three of the main ones: are Hippocrates, Aristotle, and Galen. Galen being Roman, so kind of going through the history. Hippocrates lived at about the 400 or so before the Common Era. So he was approximately at the time when the Bayit Sheni, around the time of Ezra and Nehemiah. So we're talking in one of the Greek islands. So it goes back a ways. But Hippocrates is credited with being the first person to look at disease as being entirely a natural process. Throughout all of the works of Hippocrates, he never once, not even one disease does he blame on some mystical or mysterious cause. Every single thing, and this is the primary reason why he's considered the father of modern medicine. Because he's the first person to say, no, if we understand the natural processes, if we understand anatomy, physiology, etc., then we can understand disease and we can treat it. In some cases, he had very interesting and very intelligent observations about disease and interesting and good treatments. However, the basis of his understanding of anatomy and physiology was obviously known today to be completely wrong. But the point is not so much what he believed or what he said, but it's the fact that he started the world on a new path towards understanding medicine. Instead of looking at these spiritual demons and so on and so forth in astrology, he looked at natural causes. So he believed, and let me just put this aside for a minute, and the Greek/Roman school of medicine believed in the theory of the four humors, that the human body is made up of essentially of four humors: black bile, yellow bile, phlegm, and blood, and each one coming from one of the four what they considered the elements: earth, wind, fire, and water, and it was basically imbalances of all these things which cause disease. And if you could somehow restore the proper balance, then you can treat disease. Galen was in the Roman times wrote numerous medical works. Also, arguably the most important physician until modern medicine was invented. Wrote numerous books based on these theories and based on certain anatomical studies that he had done. This is not the place to go into all of that, but I do want to focus now on where do we see evidence of all of this that's going on in Greek and Roman medicine in Chazal. Now recall that Chazal, primarily, especially in the Babylonian Talmud, but also in Israel, were much more under the influence of the Persians and the Babylonians than they were under the influence of the Greeks and later the Romans. But they certainly were under the influence of the Greeks and the Romans, and as time moved on, there were more and more Greek and Roman influence and less Persian and Babylonian influence just because of what was going on in the world at the time. However, interestingly enough, throughout Chazal, throughout all of Shas, Bavli, Yerushalmi, Mishnah, and Medrash, with one remote possible exception, there isn't one mention of the theory of the four humors.
which a lot of people look at and find to be kind of odd, that Chazal completely ignored that. There's one medrash, in an obscure medrash that who knows if it's real or not and from what century it is. Nonetheless, post-Chazal, and we're going to get to this in different lectures, the theory of the four humors and the four yisodos, the four elements, becomes, in the period of the Gaonim and Rishonim, it becomes, that's like the basics, and it becomes interpolated and kind of thrown into the interpretations of a lot of the Rishonim into interpreting Psukim and Chazal and so on. But Chazal themselves didn't touch on those theories and those ideas at all. However, there are many, many instances where ideas that are found in the writings of Hippocrates and Aristotle and Galen found their way into Shas. Now, whether that's because they directly read them, or whether it was because they were in the culture that was around them and they absorbed them, will never be known. So some examples of that are, for example, in Brachos, on Daf Nun Hey, it mentions the liver as being the place where blood was made. The first person to say that was Galen, but it becomes accepted in Shas as where blood is made. Now, don't try to correlate this with modern medicine and what we know to be true. I'm just saying what was understood then. Hippocrates was also one of the first to identify the heart as having what he identified as two parts, and then two halves with two little parts, and understood that they beat separately, basically identifying a four-chambered heart, which we find that in the Gemara as well in Chulin. The idea that there was an idea among the writings of Hippocrates that if you cut the Achilles tendon, that it automatically results in death. We may see that reflected in the medrash that many of us might be familiar with, that Moshe Rabbeinu jumped real high and cut the Achilles tendon of Og Melech HaBashan, and therefore he died. Right? So it seems to be reflected that it was understood if you cut the Achilles tendon on a person, that the person was going to die. Other examples where the Gemara Nida talks about the male fetus developing prior to the female fetus was also a thought found in Hippocrates. Or a statement in Bava Basra where it says that blood is the cause of all illness. It's almost verbatim translation from some works of Galen. So it seems that the Gemara was definitely aware of at least what was going on in Greek medicine at the time, but doesn't ever directly quote it. Another topic which I'll just touch on for a minute is the fact that certain Amoraim were known to be famous doctors. So Shmuel was one that's constantly quoted in the Gemara as having been a physician. Rabban Gamliel, not an Amora, a Tana, was quoted as someone who treated eyes, and in fact, later non-Jewish texts quoted the eye salve of Gamliel, the Jew. It's quoted it for hundreds of years later that there was this eye medicine that he had formulated. But I'm going to leave that aside because it's not the main focus of the talk tonight. But just to understand now what we've achieved until now, we've seen the three major cultural influences upon Chazal. And now, what did Chazal do when they absorbed all this information around them? They're influenced by the Persians, the Babylonians, and the Greeks. So what unique contribution did Chazal have? Now think about what was going on in the world at the time. Chazal had something that was very unique, and it had nothing to do with medicine. It was the idea of Judaism and the idea of monotheism. And so basically what Chazal did was they took all of these things and they said, yes, there may be demons and there may be Ayin Hara. And yes, there may be astrology. Although that's debatable because in the Gemara you find conflicting statements. And like I said, I'm not going into how to reconcile those statements tonight. And yes, there's natural causes. There's an interesting Gemara in Bava Metzia, which I should read, where the Gemara says something as follows. This is in Bava Metzia on Kuf Zayin Amud Beis. Rab says that Tishin v'Tisha b'Ayin Hara, 99% of diseases caused by Ayin Hara, v'Echad b'Derech Eretz, and one comes from Derech Eretz, which would be understood to mean nature, however you define nature. Shmuel says, and then the Gemara goes to find what is this Derech, what is this nature that can cause disease?
Shmuel says Zeha Ruach. Now, you can interpret Ruach in numerous ways. Most scholars assume that Shmuel is referring to Ruchos, demons. Okay? Many scholars say it means the wind, the air. And then you'd say that maybe he's coming from Persian medicine, which looks at corruption of the element of the air causing disease. Or, I was thinking another possibility, Ruach may even be humors. But who knows, whatever it is, he's attributing it to a natural cause. That's what's important. I don't really like the spirits one, because the whole point of this Gemara is derech eretz. We're identifying natural causes. And then the Gemara says a little bit about Shmuel. And then it says, Rabbi Chanina Amar Zutzina, this is cold. So Rabbi Chanina is looking at, body temperature. He's looking at exactly what he means, we'll never know. But obviously Rabbi Chanina is looking at some, and he says, because it says, Hakol bidei shamayim, everything is in the hands of heaven, chutz mitzinim pachim, except for cold, right? So what he's looking at is a natural, not only non-spiritual, but non-godly cause, like a seriously, totally, 100% natural cause that has to do with body temperature. Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina says zutsoa. This is excrement, but he's referring to the tsoa, the what comes out of the nose and the mouth when someone is ill. That he looked upon that as the cause of disease, as opposed as the result of disease. But again, he's looking for a natural cause. Rabbi Elazar says zumara. This is the bile. Now, exactly what everyone means is not that important. But what's important, and again, mara, bile, is one of the humors. So are we seeing again a hint of the four humors being reflected in these things? When he says tsoa, the phlegm, that's one of the four humors. Are we seeing a hint of the four humors in this Gemara? Shmuel said, ruach, the wind. Is that, again, is that the same idea is coming out? So these are just some thoughts that I had on this Gemara. But what's clear from this Gemara is that Chazal were absorbing the Greek understanding of disease as being naturally caused, in addition and on top of the spiritual cause of ayin hara. But that doesn't really get down to the real contribution of Chazal. And to understand that, I'm going to bring two examples. The first example, it has to do with embryology and the origin of life. So before I even go into Chazal, let me talk a little bit about what some of the Greek philosophers of the time were debating. There was a big debate. It was thought and it was understood that the first part of the body to develop in the fetus would be the source of life. So clearly, the logic would dictate that life starts from a something, and then it grows out into all the other parts, and the life continues to emanate from that original something. So there was 4 different opinions as to exactly what that something was. Aristotle was of the belief that it was the heart. And I'm going to go into the importance of the heart in a minute in Aristotle's thinking. Lactatius of Nicomedia, and please forgive my pronunciation, believed it was the head, and everything came from the head. Alcmaeon, another Greek, believed that it started from the navel, because that's where the umbilical cord was. And then Galen felt that it has to be the liver. So these are the opinions that are bouncing back through the Greek, and for hundreds of years they're sitting and debating what develops first. And it was assumed that what develops first is the source of life. Now let me just go a little bit. I said I was going to talk about the heart and the understanding of the heart. We understand the heart today to be a muscle and a pump. In those days they understood that the heart was the source of what they call the innate heat, which was the life itself, comes from the heart. And remember, they're not looking for godly sources, they're looking for natural sources. So the way they understood it was there was this essential heat that was in the heart, and that heat needs to get pumped to all the parts of the body so that the body can live, because that's where life comes from. And air that we breathe in, they believed that the trachea led directly to the heart. So therefore, the air that was breathed in would go to the heart and join forces with this heat, and the two together created this innate heat that would, they would call it the vital heat. It would be the translation, which would be spread throughout the body, and that would give life to the whole body. Now, this was something that Galen believed, and this was something that he learned from Aristotle and developed a little bit on his own. So if we understand this background, and now I want to take a look at a Gemara in Yuma, which is a very enlightening Gemara. So just give me a second to find it. course, I only have it in front of me in the English translation. I didn't write down what daf it's on. So I apologize, but give me a second. So this is the English translation of the Gemara in 80. Oh, I got it. Okay. So it's on Pehei Amud Aleph. So the Gemara is talking about a case where on Shabbos, if there's an earthquake and the building collapses and you're afraid there might be people stuck under the rubble. So the Gemara, it's a famous Gemara. It's often quoted in discussions of the time of death, and that's not the issue for tonight, but it's a Gemara that's discussed often. But so you're supposed to go and clear the rubble, even if you're not sure. Even if you're not sure if there's someone under there at all, but there might be. Even in a case of doubt, you need to do that to save a life on Shabbos. And when you find a body, if you can identify that the body is dead, then you can't continue. But if you identify that the body may be alive, then you should continue to try to save that person. So the question is as you're clearing the rubble, until what point do you clear the rubble and determine that this person is dead? So the Gemara says, until what point do you check? So the Gemara says, ad chotmo, right? Until you reach the nose, right? Ad libo. Some people say you check until you reach the heart. Obviously the question is, the nose is where you're going to feel the breath. The heart is where you're going to sense the heartbeat, right? So remember that the Greek-Roman understanding of life and the source of life is the breath combining with the heart to pump life to the rest of the body, right? So some say check to the heart. If you find that the people on the top layers are alive, but there may be people below them, you don't assume that if the top ones are dead, then the people below them are also dead, because they may be alive. And the Gemara mentions a story where the people on the bottom survived, but the people on the top did not. And we could imagine that. But then the Gemara says something really interesting. It says, Nema hani tanoi ki hani tanoi. Let's say that argument, whether you check until the heart or the nose, is dependent upon this following argument. Titania, mehechan havlad notzar. From where is the baby created? Is the baby created merosho? The Tanakama says it starts from the head. Shenemar mi me'eimi ataguzi. And so on. Abba Shaul Omer, he says, mitiburo. It starts from the navel. So these are two of the opinions that are abounding within the culture around them, being reflected in the Gemara. But the most interesting part is not so much the fact that Chazal are bringing these two opinions, which are also in the culture around them, but the fact that Chazal are making the same connection that everyone else around them did. The Gemara is making the assumption that the place from where the body starts being created is the same place which is the source of life for the rest of the body, right? So because the one who says that life starts from the head would be the one who says that life we check till the nose. The one who says that life starts from the navel would be the same one who says that we check till the heart. Okay, and that's because they used to palpate the heartbeat by pushing on the belly. So because sometimes it's easier to feel that way than through the chest, especially if it's very light. Like in a person who's buried under rubble. So then the Gemara goes on to continue, and then whatever the Gemara continues, it says it's not important for this issue right now, but it should be obvious that this idea, which we actually find in the philosophical literature of Aristotle clearly written out, that the place that gets developed first is the place which is the source of life, and Aristotle goes on to say that it's the heart, which is directly quoted by the Rambam and has halachic ramifications for today. Whether or not it should have halachic ramifications for today is a subject when one day I'll give a lecture on the time of death, and that's an extremely controversial subject, and we could talk about it another time. But leaving that aside, but what's fascinating about the whole thing is what happens in the end of the Gemara. The Gemara says that all of these arguments are all regarding only where the body is created from. But the Gemara says something that really drives home the point of what the purpose of Chazal, I shouldn't say the purpose of Chazal, what Chazal's purpose is in even discussing these topics is to say something new that's different from the culture around them. Something that they're contributing that's unique. And what is that? It says, all of this, the Okam Rabbi Shalom only said that regarding Linin Yitzira, regarding how things are created, because he felt the Chol Midi Mitziaseh Mitziatzer, that everything gets created from its middle.
However, l'inyan pikuach nefesh, when it comes to saving a soul, a life, right? Afilu abashal modi, why? The ikar chiyusa bi'apehu, that the life comes from the nose. D'chsiv kol asher nishmat ruach chaim bi'apav, that everything that has the breath of life, right? And he's directly referring to the nishmat ruach chaim that was vayipach bi'apo, that God blew into the nostrils. So since the Torah says that's where God put life into the human being, and when we're trying to determine life and death, we need to look at God's contribution and not where the body is created from physically in the natural world. So what Chazal are trying to do is inject something which the rest of the world wasn't injecting. The rest of the world was talking about the natural causes and the natural development and the innate heat and the this, that. But Chazal had something unique and special to contribute, and that was the fact that it's God that gives life. And therefore, when you're determining death, you need to look at where God gave life, and that's in the nostrils, that's the breath. Another place where we see something very similar, maybe even more blatant, is in the Gemara in Nida. But before I talk about the Gemara in Nida, which is a very famous Gemara, but hopefully after tonight you'll see it in a completely different light and understand what the Gemara really means to say. Because this Gemara is used by so many different people for so many different reasons. Give me just 1 second. I'm going to give you a little bit of background. Again, the Greek and Roman philosophers / doctors had a big argument. In addition to the argument we discussed, was another argument. And that is where the baby comes from, right? So Galen followed the lead of Hippocrates, who believed that the mother contributes a seed and the father contributes a seed, and somehow they get together and they develop into a fetus. It sounds very similar to what we know today, but they had obviously no concept of what we have a concept of today, fertilization, but they believed that they both contributed a seed. They combined somehow, and certain parts of the body were from the mother and certain parts were from the father. Aristotle said, no way, the woman doesn't contribute anything. It's just the man has a seed, and that's what grows within the woman. The woman is just a place where the baby grows. So they had this argument, and the philosophers debated it back and forth for hundreds of years. Of course, neither of them had any way of proving anything, so they just debated it. Chazal, in a very famous Gemara in Nida, Taf Lamed Aleph Amud Aleph, say as follows: Tana Rabbana, and we've all heard this in so many contexts, and we've probably heard it from this pulpit numerous times. Shlosha Shutfin Yesh Ba'adam. There's 3 partners in the creation of a human being. HaKadosh Baruch Hu v'Aviv v'Imo. There's God, and then there's the father and the mother. Aviv Mazriya Haloven. The seed of the father gives birth to the white parts of the baby, meaning the bones and the nerves and nails and so on. So on and so forth. The mad imo mazras odem, everything red within the body, so the flesh and the hair and whatever, so on and so forth. But v'hakadosh baruch hu nosin bo ruach hu neshama. But God is what gives the spirit and the soul, and everything that has to do with speech and thought and the spirit, the things which we associate with spirituality and what makes a person a person. The V'kivan she'yezmano, when the time comes li'yipater min ha'olam, for a person to die, HaKadosh Baruch Hu no telchalko. He takes his part, and the rest of it just rots. What's the Gemara trying to do here? Now, there's all kinds of understandings. We've heard this in parenting lectures. There's 3 components. There's the father and what he contributes, there's the mother she contributes, and then there's God and what he contributes. But the Gemara is, I'm convinced that Chazal is directly addressing this argument among the philosophers of their time. And Chazal are directly trying to teach us something. They're saying in the world around you, you're going to hear that the father contributes this and the mother contributes that, and that's where the human being comes from. But we are here to tell you that the real thing that binds it all together, that makes it all work, and that makes a person a human being, is the HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is the third shutaf, is the third partner. Yes, there are natural causes, and the natural creation of a human being does come from the father and from the mother, but it's God that gives that special spirit that makes a person into a person. And if we think about the unique place, we're talking in a time when maybe Christianity was in its infancy. Islam was certainly in no one's dreams yet. And people were not monotheists. And people did not, none of the cultures around them attributed anything. There was a lot of, it's not 100% accurate what I'm saying. Obviously there were echoes of this in Zoroastrianism and echoes of God creating things and good and evil and so on. But the bottom line is Chazal set the path for us to look at disease in this way, is to say, yes, we're going to learn from the people around us about the natural causes of disease. We're going to learn from them about the magical causes of disease. But I want you to know that the true cause of the disease is God, and that therefore the way to treat it is by prayer, saying Tehillim, doing tshuva, and so on. So that's the talk for tonight. I'm going to tell you that the next talk, I'm going to focus on the Arab period. So we're going to focus on the time from about the year 600 until the early, the golden age of Spain. It's going to be a very, very different talk than today, much more historic, but I'm focused on the specific role that Jewish doctors had in the bringing of the wisdom of Greek and Persian medicine, bringing it into Europe, and bringing it into the Arab world. And that's going to be the topic of next time. And hopefully you'll have a lot of interesting and new stuff to hear then. Any questions?
How did the cultures communicate their material? I mean, because Greek and Persian, the Greco-Roman Empire wasn't that close to the Persian Empire versus...
Well, there was a lot of travel, and there's a lot of trade going back and forth, and a lot of these empires were constantly warring with each other. I mean, there was people speaking and the languages.
Alexander the Great conquered.
Yeah, he certainly went all the way to India, right? So there was a lot more, intercourse among the different peoples that we think today. Like it's much more than you find a couple hundred years later in the Dark Ages, when there was much less contact between people. But one of the things that I'm going to talk about next time, and I'm giving I'm giving it away a little, is the unique role that Jews had to be those communicators. Because what you'll find is, as the Dark Ages started to descend upon Europe, right, who was there in the world of Latin speakers and French speakers that spoke Arabic? Who was there in the Arabic world that spoke Greek and could read the Greek writings? Who was there in the Greek world that can read the Babylonian and Aramaic and Syriac writings? They didn't have that kind of contact. There was only one group of people that was able to do it all, and that was the Jews. And this is what one of the focuses of the next time. We're going to talk about how Jewish doctors were the ones who were able to translate, either by translating it into Hebrew, so that Jewish doctors in places like Spain and France and other places can read the works of Aristotle and Galen and so on in Hebrew and then transmit it in the local languages, or they would directly go, or the Jews were also great at translating from whatever languages there were, from Greek or Latin, and translating it into Spanish and French and Arabic, or depending on the time of history and the place. But we're going to talk about that next time, because that's fascinating. But in this time, there was a lot more going around, a lot more people talking to each other. Any other questions? All right. Thanks for coming.